DMA has been a leader in the self-regulatory effort. We've for like I said, for more than 40 years, we've had our guidelines to ethical business practices, and that's a self-industry standard that establishes what best practices are and what we want, and the standard to which our members hold themselves to be ethical marketers. Because part of our mission is the responsible use of data to engage customers and our members. And so the word responsible is a very important element of that, and so that's why these are best practices, but they're also enforceable self-regulations. And I'd like Senny to talk a little bit about how our enforceability program process works, but the point is that these guidelines have teeth, and they're standards that our members are expected to follow. And so the guidelines have been around and periodically updated over these many years, and that's what we're going through right now. And so Data Standards 2.0 project is our effort our most recent effort to update the standards for the digital economy. So the last year we've scrutinized, we've brought together 15 or 20 experts from our member companies to scrutinize the guidelines and propose edits and bring them up with particular focus on how they apply to the ethical handling and use of data specifically. And so we made those edits. We did that scrub. Now we're going out to the membership with that as a new baseline, and then we're going to use that as that baseline to begin a conversation about specific use cases, real-world use cases, and that's and so that those use cases that will explore what is permissible and what are prohibited uses of data will be brought together with and that will essentially produce the updated guidelines that we intend to complete by probably the middle of next year, but it will be finalized and rolled formally at the next AndThen conference in 2017. So that's the overview. Sandy, could you talk about the accountability piece?
Sure, absolutely. And for our colleagues in the other DMAs, this probably sounds fairly familiar to what some of your policies and procedures are. So as Emmett mentioned, we have this code, this ethical code, and we're asking both members and non-member organizations that are using direct marketing, all different channels of marketing, fundraising, to adhere to these. If they don't adhere, then we use our ethics operating process. We are actually fairly distinct in that years ago the Federal Trade Commission granted us an antitrust immunity to proceed on these matters. We want to make sure that we're doing this in the right approach, and the FTC actually favors organizations to handle self-regulation before, of course, getting into some very difficult issues before the Federal Trade Commission. So years ago we received that antitrust exemption in order to do this work. So basically the way the process works to make sure that we have the teeth, that we have sort of the sanctioning authority for the Direct Marketing and now Data and Marketing Association. We will proceed through our Ethics Operating Committee. We'll get a consumer complaint. We want to make sure we've got appropriate evidence, which might be a little more interesting as we're heading into data-driven marketing and trying to get some of the proof of what exactly happened for that consumer. What was their experience? And then we'll take that over to the committee. The committee, these are comprised of practitioners. These are very well-renowned marketers who know the process, who know really what are some of the responsible accountability practices, and they can take a look and review exactly what happened in that instance. And they will then vote whether or not we're going to publicize the matter, whether we will send that over to one of the enforcement authorities, whether or not we'll put that in our annual report. And now we are just changing our process. We're right in the middle of updating this, where we're going to start publishing companies immediately and not wait for a certain report, but we're going to actually have an ongoing list to showcase which organizations simply will not work with us. And then I will work with Emmett and my colleague Chris here in order to make sure at the state and federal level, if we are having an issue, that we also work through those channels to make sure that we get these companies into compliance. The good news is that over 90% of the companies are very responsive, and in fact, I've had the pleasurable experience of working with privacy authorities in leading companies, whereas 10 years ago, when I first really started looking at this, there really was not that sort of enforceability. The companies simply didn't have the awareness of privacy as they do today, or preference, the need for having preference centers and accountability. So it's actually been a very effective program for us. We've only had to refer very periodically, but most companies will communicate with us and will be very open and transparent to get their processes in line. So back to you.
So Chris, could you talk a little bit more about what we call phase 2?
Sure.
How we're going to be digging in this next year?
Sure, absolutely. So as Emmett mentioned, we've had this industry self-regulatory code for decades, and periodically, as technologies evolve, as innovations present themselves, we've updated that code, to address those new marketing practices. And with the explosion of innovation and technology, and we've heard about it today, video, mobile, the explosion of data that is out there and available for marketing purposes, we felt that the time was ripe to take a wholesale evaluation of the particular areas of our existing code that relate to data. And we've taken out those provisions and examined them with about a dozen and a half experts like Sheila, who are in our member companies that are chief privacy officers, compliance officers, chief data officers, that sort of expertise in the room, looking at the code as it exists, understanding where data is being used today, but also looking towards the future of where are we going to see new data sources, and what do we need to do as an industry to make sure that we are creating the rules of the road for responsible handling of that data for responsible marketing purposes. And that is what birthed the Data Standards 2.0 project. So this last year, as Emmett had mentioned, we've gone through that code, examined some of these provisions that have been in there since the 70s, 60s, even before, and editing them, making sure that we established a foundation upon which we can build upon the ethical use of data in particular use case areas. We're looking at developing a more normative type of standard rather than just sort of essentially guidelines, but looking at particular use cases. For example, the nature of how we view video is changing. It was TV, now it's Netflix, now it's paid subscription services that are delivered to us in a number of different platforms and through our devices. How can we responsibly use the data that is being thrown off of those devices to identify customers and potential customers and deliver them the right message in a very responsible way that respects their choices? This is an area that we'll look at. Other areas that we'll consider, looking at the Internet of Things. When your car, as you're driving down the street, talks to your refrigerator, that talks to your grocery store, that says, oh, by the way, your milk is about to expire and Safeway has a sale. Maybe you want to think about how do we responsibly take all of those different data sets as they will integrate, and how do we responsibly, as an industry, deliver the right tailored message to that particular consumer, while again respecting their choices and being transparent. So those are just two examples, but we'll see other areas where the code will evolve to address those particular use cases to create normative standards, which are not just guidelines, but not just what we can do with the data, but what we should do with the data to respect that consumer choice.
So that's how we're going to be spending the next year, and we're excited to. We're excited to. We know it's going to be a lot of work. It's already been considerable of effort these past years. Thank you, Sheila and others. But we're excited to really delve into these use cases because we know, and we know through our years of work with the the FTC and other authorities that for our guidelines to have credibility, they need to they need to really spell out the rules of the road for marketers for what is the responsible use of data, and to have, and just to go back to that credibility issue, this is where we need to, we're really excited to dig into the various use cases so that we can produce clear guidelines for permissible and, in certain cases where other uses of data will be declared impermissible, that in order to be a responsible marketer, you need to do it this way and maybe not that way. So,
if I might just supplement
please.
by saying, as a practitioner working inside of a very large service provider that does the marketing solutions for very large companies all over the world, we use the DMA ethical guidelines for years. When we have a question about are we getting too close to the line, operationally, very practically, we pull up the guidelines and we measure our implementation against the guidelines. So very, very important from a practical perspective to have a set of boundaries or guidelines. But the difficulty has been that in this new era, truly, of data explosion, when there's masses of new flavors of data and that you can do things we never imagined, or maybe only imagined and now can do, should you do it, has been the question. And when we've referred to the guidelines, they have not been caught up. So this particular effort, this 2.0, is super exciting because it's a bunch of folks like me that practice in the area, that see the big, URL strings that are 1,000 strings long, that pull the behavioral data in with it, and we're going to map it to some CRM data. And what does that look like? What is permissible? And our very sophisticated algorithms, how far can you take it? So the 2.0 is going to be a truly a next-gen reference guide for permissible and prohibited. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And how do we operate safely and effectively to put the consumer at the center? I think that has been the big criticism of our industry, is that we put our brands at the center, and we need to take the brand out and put the consumer at the center and begin building that relationship around what they need and what they expect. And these guidelines are going to help us do that in a very practical, again, operational way. Pretty important.
So that's where we're headed. Open to any questions anyone might have. Please.
Good to see everyone. I was at a presentation of the Federal Trade Commission last month, and they encouraged self-regulation from trade groups highly, but they said there's so many bad actors falling outside the realm of trade groups that they're concerned about and casts a bad light on good practitioners. What are your thoughts about how this translates to those who are outside of kind of the DMA network and other networks?
I'll just jump in. This is our belief, and this is what we proselytize, that the DMA sets up what is fair and appropriate. And we have this set of guidelines, and we're going to have these new set. And then the FTC or the state AGs can enforce against that fairness standard, right? If you don't practice this way, then you are a bad actor. And it allows us to, as an industry, shape what is reasonable, fair, appropriate, and that the rest of the bad actors get measured against. But in my view, it is clearly hunting grounds for the state AGs and the FTC.
Well, and as Senny alluded to earlier, but we'll just make clear, our guidelines, we'll take complaints about DMA members and non-members. And Senny's enforcement program will enforce against and reach out to non-members when those complaints are received. And so we hope that the guidelines will be effective for members and non-members alike. Certainly, if and Senny can probably give us many examples, but most times when our enforcement team knocks on their door, members and non-members alike, change their behaviors and bring them into alignment with the guidelines. And then it's only extreme cases that then have to get referred to the authorities. But does anyone
Yeah,
else?
absolutely. So a couple of points. In terms of the bad actors, we definitely want to make sure that the industry is aware. So we want to make sure that we're publicizing who are these bad actors, and that we refer them, as you both mentioned, to the state authorities, as they need to be out there and handling those cases because they can cross into criminality. We're a trade association, so we're here about best practices and guidelines. But if it is criminal behavior, we want to make sure we're referring that. We also, on a day-to-day basis, have a mission and a mandate to help the consumer. So if a consumer is being victimized, we want to resolve that problem immediately for that consumer and move on and see what else we can do with that situation. So we have the mandate to enforce the regulations and also to help the consumers. We talk to thousands of consumers in a year's time, and we want to make sure that we can continue to do that under these new standards.
Emmett, if I can
Sure.
comment on your question, Ken. There are bad actors who are unaware that they are bad actors. And in 90% of the cases, the compliance efforts of our self-regulation enforcement do bring them into compliance. Those that are not brought into compliance, Cindy and her team then release that information publicly into the authorities. There is another type of actor that is not in compliance, and I'm intentionally avoiding using the word bad actor. And it is the explosion of startups in the MarTech and AdTech space who are brilliant in terms of their ability to connect dots that no one else has connected and to bring together technology and connect it with the consumer marketplace. They have not been as educated in the ways of self-regulation. And I think that is a community that DMA and Saturday when the Global Alliance met and spoke, we all have an awareness for reaching this startup community. So just as they grow up to innovate well, we also want them to grow up as businesses that comply well, understand, comply, and respect the self-regulatory guidelines and framework. So that's another community that this DMA is very aware of and working diligently to reach and connect with. So I would add that other community that I don't know if it was included in your question, but I think it's important for us to be aware of.
A couple of questions, and it's music to my ears because we're just going through this process at our end as well, so I'm hoping there's a way that we can potentially work together and get some standards across two different continents. One of the challenges we're having is how to keep the principles broad enough that they can keep up with the changes, but then detailed enough that they have meaning. If you go too broad, it doesn't have meaning, it doesn't actually provide any guidance to anybody, but you go too detailed, it can't keep up with the changes that are coming through our industry. So how are you going to deal with that through the guidelines that you're putting together?
So one of the benefits of looking at particular use cases is there are already practitioners that are in this space, and our mission is to draw them in to the DMA and this particular project so that we can learn from them what are the cutting edge practices, what are folks like Sheila and some of our brands, what are their needs, what are they currently doing with the data, how are they communicating with their consumers. And I think with those very smart people in the room, with the understanding and the notion that we are doing this for the consumer, as Sheila said, it's consumer-centric, I think that we'll be able to come up with revised guidelines focused in on these use cases that, again, protect and respect the consumer and their businesses, that are transparent in the way that we can enforce against them and level set consumer expectations, and yet remain broad enough, again, to your question, that we leave space for innovation and we allow technology to continue to develop, to grow that relationship between the marketer and their